Hi, I'm David Badcock. I'm the Chief Executive of Drug Science, and I'm absolutely delighted to be taking part in this wonderful podcast, Professionally Cannabis.
Where do they go, the smoke rings I blow each night?
Hello, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Professionally Cannabis. I'm Oscar Houseman, and with me is my old friend and co-host, Johnny Weiser. Johnny, how are you doing today?
I'm very good, Oscar. I'm very good. And I realised today, looking back at my calendar, we've been friends for 22 years. That's quite impressive.
Jeez, I got old. When did that happen? 22 years of friendship. I'm sure there must be a special word for a number where all the digits are the same. Why were you looking at your calendar today? Do you have anything big coming up?
No.
3 months into lockdown and we're not allowed to look forward to anything yet again. But I suppose our listeners are probably listening to this to remind themselves, or rather, not remind themselves, but forget their current
Remind
lockdown.
themselves of a better life.
So, for their sake and for ours, let's not talk about planning things ahead or doing things fun or greeting our friends. Let's just talk about things that can be done remotely, content drilled into their ears from afar, and data to be collected from thousands of cannabis users in the UK. So with that in mind, Johnny, who do we have today?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. And yes, for today's episode, really happy to say that we have David Badcock, who is the CEO of Drug Science. Now, Drug Science are a UK-based organisation who are the pioneers of Project 2021 that you may have heard of. Oscar, for folks that may not have heard of Project T21, could you give a little snippet as to the type of insights that they might hear from David's episode today?
Yes, well, Drug Science are, I believe, a non-profit organisation, but ultimately devoted towards drug reform. And they've seen in UK cannabis, despite the legalisation in 2018, that there's barely any patient access. So what's the deal? If the government said, yes, this is a medicine, but if in practice no patient can actually access it, it seems that there's a disconnect. So that's what Project 2021 is there to target, I suppose. They're aiming to find licensed producers of cannabis-based medicine products and give those medicines to patients for free. 20,000 patients by 2021. It's big numbers, very aggressive. And then run an observational study to see what effect those medicines had on the patients. I think it's a great way to get some working data on people who use cannabis as a medicine, and also just gain more comfort within the UK and the UK medical community and get doctors used to the idea of cannabis-based products being prescribed to their patients safely and effectively. I don't know if that summary was a bit long. I'm sure David Badcock will explain it better in his own words, so perhaps we should flip over to him.
Where do they go, the smoke
Today,
rings I
I'm really
blow
happy to welcome
each
to the pod
night?
David Badcock, CEO of Drug Science, a leading scientific body focusing on a wide array of drugs, including, but not limited to, cannabis. Creators of Project 2021, Drug Science aim to get cannabis medicines into the hands of over 20,000 patients in the UK, which I think I can safely say is something we can all get behind. David, a pleasure to have you join us on Professionally Cannabis.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Very happy to have a conversation with you right now.
Well, we're glad to have you on, David. And I think you're going to bring an interesting perspective on this because we haven't really had, and perhaps it goes to how you might define what drug science is later on, but I don't think we've had a perspective that will be quite the same as yours, something that sits in between commerce, research, and policy. So I'd like to open with our customary question. What led you to the plant?
Oh, I think that's a great question. I think if you've asked anybody that question, you'll probably get a different response. I think there's a whole range of reasons why people are interested in cannabis. And from my perspective, it's very much around the way in which cannabis is perceived in society, in that generally people have been led to believe over many years that cannabis is a dangerous drug to use. But actually, there's lots of evidence to show that isn't the case. And the more that I have looked into that over the years, the more that I've met people who use cannabis, the more that I've spoken to medical professionals who have an understanding of the therapeutic benefits of cannabis, the more I've realized myself that it's a drug that it was a substance that has great therapeutic potential, but that potential is completely restricted by the draconian restrictions on regulations that are stopping people from using it in a safe way and in that therapeutic way. And I've spent many years, sort of 15 years or so, working either in drug services or talking to people who have had drug problems. And it seems to me that the laws just do not match up with the reasons that people have problems with it. And I think we need to do much more research. I think we need to have much better understanding. There needs to be much better evidence in terms of the therapeutic qualities of cannabis. But it's absolutely needed, and that's something that we're trying to do at Drug Science to help people understand that cannabis shouldn't be seen as an evil substance. It should be seen as something that could help many people with many different conditions, many different illnesses to get better. And I have great interest in that. I really do.
So for folks that perhaps are less au fait with drug science and the amazing work that you guys have been doing, would you be able to give our listeners a quick overview of the organisation, how it came about, and perhaps some of the projects that you work on?
Yeah, of course. I mean, Drug Science is an amazing charity. It was established 10 years ago by Professor Nutt. I think many people probably know of Professor Nutt, and they know that he was the chief drugs advisor to the government, and was sacked because he told the truth about drugs. The government didn't like what he said, but all that he was saying was really just scientific, evidence-based understanding of the impact that drugs can have. And he set Drug Science up because he knew that there was no kind of independent body that was able to kind of give out the right information, the kind of messages that we want people to hear. So it's an organization that is completely free from any political or commercial influence. We provide an evidence base for both the harms and the benefits that drugs can have. And particularly the second part of that is something that we're really interested in, how drugs can be used in a therapeutic way, which might come as a surprise to a lot of people. So we want to kind of disseminate that information. We want people to understand that drugs, not evil substances, they have to be regulated for sure. There are people do have problems with drugs. We're not disputing that at all. But we do want people to look at drugs in a slightly different way. And essentially, we want drug policy to be based on scientific evidence, and as simple as that, nothing other than the evidence that backs up where drug policy should be. We're doing lots of really exciting things. In terms of cannabis, we've launched a very exciting project called Project 2021. Essentially, the purpose of that project is to accelerate the access of medical cannabis to patients who need it.
Excellent. So I guess for our listeners who are coming to this podcast as a cannabis and cannabis business podcast, that might make a bit clearer that Drug Science is a charity rather than a commercial unit. But I think what's really interesting here with your Project 2021 is you're trying to mix that charitable aim with other established businesses. So with that in mind, and with probably many of our listeners wondering how on earth do we get products to patients in need in the UK, are you able to tell us a little bit about Project 2021, who's involved, how patients will benefit?
Yeah, of course. So the Project 2021 is essentially a collaborative approach. We know that the only way that this project can work is if we include all stakeholders within it, and that includes industry, includes producers who are manufacturing products available for patients. But essentially, the idea is that we've created what's called a real-world data registry, which will collect evidence from patients as they are prescribed cannabis, and will record patient outcomes throughout the duration of the project. And to do that, we are working with specific licensed producers who will be providing their products into the registry at a very subsidized price, so that the current high cost of accessing medicine is one of the barriers that we've overcome. So it's a multi-collaborative project that includes licensed producers, it includes clinicians, patients, and other stakeholders, policy stakeholders, who will help us to overcome the vast array of regulations that currently are making it harder for patients to access the medicine that they need.
Delving into the patient access aspect of what you just said, David, currently there's about maybe 100 patients consuming cannabis-derived products on the NHS. How does your study interlink with, I suppose, NHS or NICE, or really what's the method for allowing patients to access this? Because I'm sure lots of LPs are very willing to give their products to patients in the UK if they can battle through the regulatory minefield.
Yeah, well, you see, the NHS is really the ultimate stakeholder that we want to see involved in this. We know that, we all know that NHS can currently prescribe a very limited range of cannabis-based medicinal products, and there are plenty others that are not able to be prescribed on the NHS at the moment. But that's what we want to change. We want to provide the evidence that NHS and NICE can use to be able to expand the range of products that can be prescribed through the NHS, reimbursed by the NHS, so that patients don't have to pay it. But in order to get to that point, we know that we have to work within the private sector to begin with, because that's the only way that the unlicensed products can be prescribed. So that's, what we need is doctors who can provide specials to patients, and will use the data to then present to NHS and to NICE and to MHRA and all the regulatory bodies, and show that there is efficacy within the use of these products, so that they can start to build better regulations, a better framework where there is a much broader range of products available for people with different conditions, and start to move away from the quite narrow focus there is at the moment available through the NHS.
And are there particular illnesses and conditions that folks are able to enrol on Project 2021 for? And I guess there's an extension of that question for patients and potential prospective future patients that might be listening to this pod. What's the process? What's the journey for them to enroll?
So it's really important to say that this is an observational study, first and foremost. And that means that, so firstly, it's not a trial, it's a study. We have to be very clear about that. There's no enrolling as you might consider that to be. We're not inviting applications and then selecting patients who will then take part in it. It's an observational study. And what that means is we, as in drug science, can have no influence or intervention in the clinical decisions that are made for patients. So what we are doing, what 2021 is a framework of clinicians and products and patients where they are all linked up together and can be prescribed medication, but only based purely on the clinical decision and nothing else. So rather than potential patients coming to us and we then refer into clinics, we are simply signposting patients to to clinics or doctors that they can go to in order to have a clinical assessment and potentially be prescribed a medical cannabis product as a result. But there's no enrollment in that sense. So what we are asking people to do is to register their interest on the Drug Science website, and you can just go to our website and put in your details. And we're only asking for name and contact details, and that's it. We're not asking for any medical history or any information about any conditions or what they're looking for. We simply take their details and we tell them the information where they can go, and they can either self-refer, they can have a referral from a GP, but it's really up to them to make that journey. And then it's up to the doctor to obviously assess the patient and to determine in consultation with the patient what medication they need, whether that's cannabis, whether it's not cannabis, and if it is cannabis, whether that's THC or CBD or a combination of the two. And so that's how the process works, really. It's as I said, the important thing is that it's an observational study. So we are simply creating the framework, not being involved in that clinical processing at all.
Are there any particular illnesses and conditions that you think are perhaps best suited or initially best suited to cannabis and cannabis medicines?
We have focused the Project 2021 on some specific conditions, and we've chosen those for some good reasons. Firstly, this is where we think we have real expertise. So the project consists of some of the very top doctors and academics in the UK in certain conditions. And we know that there's good anecdotal evidence that cannabis can be very helpful in those circumstances, in those conditions. And we want to look at those in particular to kind of generate the evidence around that. But it's not, by no means is it a comprehensive thing, but we do want to expand the range of conditions that we will specialize in. But those conditions are, broadly, they are pain, anxiety, PTSD, multiple sclerosis, epilepsy, and anxiety. I think, if I didn't say that one already. We're not saying that you have to fit into one of those categories in order to access the project and to potentially access medical cannabis. But that's where we are focusing our energy on at the moment.
Now, I have a question which is going to perhaps need some Nostradamus qualities from your end. But, if I were to ask you to look into the future and perhaps with the focus on regulation and policy, where do you see things going in the UK?
It remains to be seen just how long it will take. If things were left to just, sort of natural processes, how long it would be before people were actually able to receive the medication that they want, and for all the barriers that we know about have been removed. And that will happen within a few years. But what we want to do is just simply to speed that up, because the UK particularly has a kind of long-standing history of wanting to look at very detailed, significant randomized controlled trials to kind of identify an evidence base, which is great. But what we know about cannabis is that will take a huge amount of time to do that. Cannabis is such a complex plant. It has many, it would need a lot of RCTs to understand how the plant works and how it has an effect on people. And that would take a long time. It would cost a huge amount of money. And the whole point of 2021 and the real world registry is that it is evidence that can be used and should be used in developing the guidelines and the regulations, which will take a fraction of the time, a fraction of the cost of delivering all those RCTs. We believe that RCTs, of course, need to be done, and that's very important. But the thing about cannabis is that people are using it right now, and people are being forced to take unnecessary risks in order to use cannabis for medical purposes. We're not talking about recreational, we're just talking about medical purposes. They're having to take big risks by having to access cannabis through the illicit market, having to grow their own, or having to pay very high prices for private prescriptions as they stand, or having to travel to different parts of the world, having to live in different parts of the world. That is not an acceptable situation as far as we're concerned. We can't wait for RCTs to provide us with all the answers. There are over 1 million people in the UK who are using cannabis for medical purposes. We just need to get the evidence that currently exists. We need to generate the evidence from everybody who's using cannabis right now in order to create the right guidelines, to create the right framework to open up access for patients.
One thing I wanted to talk about was the makeup of the team at Drug Science. So I've had the pleasure of hearing yourself and Professor David Nutt speak, and I've met Ian Miller, and you're a group of free spirits, I think. How would you describe the ethos over at Drug Science?
Well, I love being described as free spirits. I think that's a great way, and that's probably quite true in many respects. On the basis that drug science, the core of drug science is the scientific committee. And you can find all this information out on our website. But the scientific committee is really kind of the beating heart of drug science. It's made up of all the top academics and scientists and policy experts in the UK who have an understanding about all drugs and all illicit drugs, who come together to form an expert panel. And that panel is completely unrivaled, in my opinion. There is no other body, whether it be government body or independent, that could rival the level of expertise that drug science has on its scientific committee. It's led by Professor David Nutt, but it's really his vision and his influence that have brought all the other experts together to form drug science. And I like the fact that you kind of described this as free spirits, because I think not so much free spirits. I mean, it's a committee that very much has evidence kind of ingrained into it, and we never want to divert away from evidence. But it is a committee of trailblazers. It's a committee of the thought leaders who have blazed the trail around their particular area of specialism, and who are pushing boundaries and wanting to challenge the status quo, or challenge the perception that many people have, by delivering groundbreaking research, producing new evidence that either doesn't exist or hasn't existed for a long, long time, because it's been very difficult to do because of the laws over the last 50 or so years. And that's what makes drug science a completely unique organization and a cherished organization. I think it's important to say that all the members of the scientific committee are essentially volunteers. Nobody is reimbursed at all from the committee. It's only the staff team who are paid, but the scientific committee do it not because they are being paid to do it, not because they have to do it, not because it's for any other reason other than they fundamentally believe that scientific evidence should underpin drug policy, should underpin people's understanding of what drugs are, what the potential therapeutic use that they can have. And that's so important for society.
So we've focused a lot on cannabis and cannabis medicines, which of course is natural being on the Professionally Cannabis Podcast. But would you be able to speak a little bit to some of the other initiatives, research projects and work that drug science are doing outside of cannabis?
Yeah, I mean, just to say, we've spoken a lot about cannabis, and as you said, this is a podcast that does focus on cannabis, but it's certainly not the only thing that we're interested in at drug science. I mean, we were interested in it at the moment because it is such an important substance, such an important thing at the moment, and that's why we are putting a lot of time and energy into it. But there certainly are other aspects of drugs that we have always been interested in. The one that is also we're putting a lot into at the moment is around psychedelic drugs, and looking specifically, really about, again, the potential therapeutic value of psychedelic drugs. So psilocybin, LSD in particular, and how those drugs can be used to help people, particularly with mental health problems. So I've talked about the medical cannabis working group. We have another group that looks that's set up in the same kind of way, structured in the same kind of way, that is looking to generate some more evidence around the use of psychedelic drugs in therapeutic settings, people with mental health problems, and that's tremendously exciting. Just like cannabis, there's huge potential. Just like cannabis, psychedelics there is a perception of psychedelic drugs. There's stigma a lot, probably even more than cannabis actually. And there are outdated laws that are not evidence-based as well. And all of those things are restricting research. They are restricting people being able to use in a safe and in a beneficial way. And we want that to change, just like cannabis. We want that to change. We want to see psychedelic drugs descheduled so that we can do more research and then they can be used therapeutically. Again, that's not all though. We're interested in, alcohol. It's the one legal drug that we are interested in, but looking at how alcohol reacts in different situations, how people react to alcohol, should I say, in different situations, and trying to understand if there are better ways that people can consume alcohol than they currently do.
I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about the psychedelic side of things, actually. Are you thinking of a Project 2025 where you get 25,000 people to try hallucinating? I think it would be good for the culture.
Yeah.
I think your sign-ups would fill up very quickly if 20,000 people were given MDMA.
Well, I think they would. But I think we would get an awful lot of interest. You're absolutely right. I mean, we've kind of got a ready-made name there, haven't we? Now, so we kind of set that out. Project 2025 is going to be the new project. But there's no reason why conceptually you couldn't do a similar kind of thing with psychedelic drugs. I think people often think there's a kind of a real similarity between cannabis and psychedelic drugs, and it's just a case of psychedelics following the path of cannabis. It's not quite as simple as that. I mean, they are very different drugs. They have they can be used in very different ways, and certainly need a different regulatory framework. But having said that, they are certainly similar in that psychedelic drugs have a huge therapeutic value potential. That there isn't enough, not enough research has been done because of the laws, and there isn't enough evidence as a result. But there are many people who do use those drugs, and again, a real world data registry could be the way forward there. My personal view is that they will be certainly available for research and available for much wider use within a few years. We can't just wait for that to happen. We need that to accelerate. We need that to be much, much quicker. We need to generate evidence now. There is evidence. The team at Imperial, which is led by David Nutt, doing various studies at the moment looking at the way in which people respond to a psychedelic therapy with very severe mental health problems, and that evidence is showing already that people are responding very, very well to that. It kind of barely touches the sides, I think, and there needs to be so much more evidence around these things. There's so much more research, and that would happen if the regulations are relaxed. If psychedelic drugs are descheduled to Schedule 2.
And continuing on the topic around psychedelics, I have a question for you, and I guess there's sort of no right or wrong answer here, but I'd love to get your 2 cents on it. A number of conversations that I've had with folks, there are some people that think perhaps the word psychedelics might be a barrier in progress being made in this sense, in terms of the framing word of psychedelics may hold too much of those traditional taboo characteristics, the same way that sort of people might associate with the word weed, which I guess is why the medical market around marijuana is very much focused around cannabis rather than weed. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I do agree. In some ways, I certainly agree. I think there's a huge amount of stigma around psychedelic drugs, and that's come from years and 40, 50 years of a media campaign to kind of portray psychedelic drugs in a particular way. People often think it's hippies in the 1970s who sit around taking drugs, and that's it. The term psychedelics, comes with its own stigma, and I think it's possible that's not healthy trying to move forwards. At the same time, people understand the term psychedelics. It has a people, if you try to change it to something perhaps more scientific, it may not, people might not understand what it is, and it may not have the same kind of traction.
All right, I think we've probably got time for one more question here. So I guess let's go for something a little bit fun, seeing as we've had a lot of serious stuff. So what's the Christmas party like at Drug Science? Is it just red wine, or is it a bacchanalian?
Well, what a good question. I haven't been asked before. So the person said the Christmas party at Drug Science this year actually took place in January. And that's because we literally couldn't find a time before Christmas, because we were all so busy. Of course, we were working so hard that we couldn't find a time before Christmas, so we had it in January. We so we of course we went to the pub, and we had a really good evening. An evening in the pub is great fun with the Drug Science guys, for sure. So yeah, we had a really nice Christmas party, albeit in January, not actually at Christmas time.
So you guys like to arrive late to the party. Some of the funnest people always do.
That's it, exactly. We were fashionably late, so late that it actually tipped into the next year. But maybe this year we'll be able to kind of schedule it a little bit.
Well, we'll hope there's parties allowed at all this year.
If we can get to that point, exactly. I'd hope by that point we'll at least be able to kind of be in the same room as each other. But that remains to be seen, I think, doesn't it?
Yes. Well, David, I'm sure I'm speaking for myself and Johnny here. We've loved having you on. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. It really has. Thanks very much indeed.
Where do they go? The smoke rings I blow.
Well, that was another admirable name onto our roster. Johnny, how do you like how this season is shaking up?
You know, I've had a real blast recording these episodes so far. Obviously, Oscar, I miss seeing your face in our normal studio due to our remote recordings because of lockdown. But I think that we've had a real eclectic mix of guest speakers, real industry leaders, but from different backgrounds of the industry. Season 1 was predominantly focused on the business side of things, and we've certainly opened up the repertoire, so to speak, to the other key and crucial areas of the industry. And listener, if there are types of organizations or specific leaders that you think would make really excellent guests for the Professionally Cannabis Pod, please do get in touch and let us know. We're always happy to receive feedback.
And as ever, if you enjoyed the episode, please like, subscribe, and share with a friend. That's all for this week, listeners. Until next time, take care.
Hello, please take me above, take me with you.